Hello everyone, and welcome back. Whether you're here to learn something new, to relax, or just to let your imagination drift back in time, you're in the perfect place. Today, we're stepping into the Ice Age, not to hunt mammoths or build stone tools, but to peek into the quietest, softest corner of prehistoric life. How did caveman babies sleep peacefully through bitterly cold winters? Long before blankets, cribs, or heated rooms, newborns faced freezing nights where even a small drop in temperature could mean real danger. And yet, they survived, warm, calm, and safe. How did parents do it? This isn't just a story. It's an educational journey into the hidden world of ancient parenting. We'll explore how mothers and fathers shielded their little ones from frostbite and icy winds, creating fur cradles and soft nests to keep them cozy. We'll see how infants slept pressed close to a mother's heartbeat, how firelight brought gentle warmth without risk, and how nursing through the night kept both baby and mother warm. We'll discover how soothing rhythms, rocking, and soft sounds replaced lullabies, how families guarded their sleeping infants against predators, and how tribes shared heat and protection so the youngest members could rest in peace. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. We love seeing your messages. This channel exists because of you. Without you, none of these journeys into the past would be possible. And just one quick reminder, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. If you relax too much and drift off before the end, you might forget. Your support helps us share more peaceful, fascinating stories of human history. Now take a deep breath, feel the glow of a fire in the dark, hear the quiet heartbeat of a mother, and imagine a winter night long ago. This is how prehistoric babies slept soundly in a frozen world, and how these simple acts of love shaped the survival of humankind. The winters of the Ice Age were relentless, stretching like long, unbroken shadows across the land. Snow fell not for days, but for weeks, and each flake seemed to carry the weight of silence. Forest became hushed under its heavy cloak, and even rivers slowed to a crawl beneath the armor of ice. For the humans who lived then, there was no escaping this deep cold. They were not shielded by thick walls or glass windows as we are now, and there were no woven blankets or heated rooms to retreat to. The world outside their shelters was merciless, and each night was a test of endurance. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the darkness carried a sharp edge, a biting chill that crept through cracks and settled into every bone. This was the world that welcomed their children into life, a world where the first breath of a newborn was drawn in air so cold it could sting the lungs. Imagine the family gathered inside a crude hut built of branches, hides, and earth. The wind outside roared like a wild animal, clawing at the entrance, slipping its icy fingers inside whenever it found a gap. The parents lay close to one another, their bodies forming a living shield around their baby. The child's soft breath rose in tiny clouds against the darkness, barely visible in the glow of a low, smouldering fire. Even a single draught of air felt dangerous. The parents knew instinctively what modern science later confirmed, that infants could not hold their warmth for long. Their tiny hearts beat faster to keep pace with the cold, and every shiver was a plea for protection. The mother and father did not dare let the fire die. Throughout the night, one of them would stir, adding twigs or bits of bone to the coals, keeping the flame alive not just for light, but as a fragile barrier between their child and the icy world pressing in from every side. The earth in those days was locked in rhythms of glacial and interglacial ages. Some winters were less severe, but others struck with such ferocity that even the hardiest hunters feared the long night. Ice sheets sprawled across northern lands like vast white kingdoms, and where the ice receded, bitter winds swept over plains that seemed endless and empty. In this harshness, every sound carried weight: the crunch of snow underfoot, the groan of trees bending in the wind, and the faint rustle of predators in the dark. For a baby, all of this was filtered through the soft cocoon of family. Though they could not understand the danger, their small bodies felt it with an unspoken urgency. Warmth was not a luxury, it was life itself. Families had to plan their every move around this reality. When a child was born, it was not simply another mouth to feed. It was a responsibility so immense that entire hunting parties altered their routes to stay near sheltered valleys or caves. The choice of camp was no longer only about the availability of food, but about where the winds blew less fiercely, where snow could be cleared away, and where fires would not be easily extinguished. A cave was a treasure. Its walls cut the wind. Its stone floor retained heat if lined with furs. In such places, human beings learned to tame the flame, feeding it carefully so smoke would rise without choking the sleeping baby. In open huts, they learned to pack snow along the walls to block drafts, turning an enemy into a friend. Life inside these shelters was a delicate balance. The fire had to burn hot enough to keep the baby warm, but not so high as to risk sparks or suffocation. The family slept close together, the baby nestled between mother and father, where the combined heat of their bodies created a living hearth. This closeness shaped not only their nights, but their bonds. A crying infant was never far from comforting arms. The parents learned the rhythms of their baby's breathing, waking at the faintest change in sound, long before danger could strike. It was a life of constant watchfulness, but also of deep intimacy. Even in bitter cold, there was tenderness, and even in darkness, there was the soft glow of care. The winters taught lessons that would be passed down for thousands of years. Parents learned to notice the smallest signs: cold fingertips, lips turning pale, or a sudden stillness that was not sleep. They learned how to use every part of the animals they hunted: skins for wrapping, bones to fuel the fire, fat for lamps that glowed gently through the night. They learned that a calm baby, one who slept peacefully, was more likely to survive than a child who cried from cold and exhaustion. This knowledge became instinct, etched into human behavior, long before words or writing could record it. Outside, the world held its own danger. Predators prowled on the edge of the firelight: wolves, cave lions, and other creatures whose hunger was sharpened by winter's scarcity. The cold made every living thing desperate, and desperation made them bold. Parents slept lightly, ready to rise at any strange sound. Yet, amid this fear, there was remarkable resilience. Human beings, even men, were problem solvers. If a camp was unsafe, they moved. If the winds shifted, they rebuilt their shelters. They learned that survival meant adaptability, and that adaptability meant protecting the smallest and most vulnerable first. Sometimes, winter storms came so suddenly that families were trapped indoors for days, huddled together in darkness, living off dried meat and the warmth of one another's breath. For the baby, these long nights were softened by the gentle rocking of arms, by the rhythm of a heartbeat close to its ear, by the soothing hums or quiet murmurs of parents who instinctively knew that calm voices eased restless sleep. The wind might shriek outside, but inside there was a cocoon of sound and warmth. Over time, these practices became second nature. Humans learned how to line their shelters with grasses to trap heat, how to make bedding soft enough for an infant to rest, and how to place the baby where smoke would not sting its eyes yet warmth would always reach its skin. They knew that comfort was not a luxury but a shield against death. Even the act of nursing, feeding the child through the night, was shaped by the cold. A mother kept her infant pressed against her body, sharing warmth with every heartbeat, so that both could sleep without fear of freezing. These quiet, ordinary moments were as important to human survival as the great hunts or the making of stone tools. The Ice Age carved these habits deep into the human story. By protecting their babies so carefully, early humans ensured that more children survived to adulthood, that tribes remained strong, and that knowledge of how to endure the cold was never lost. In every fire tended through the night, in every fur wrap pulled tight around a small body, there was a story of love written in silence. The world outside might have been brutal and unforgiving, but inside those small shelters, humanity glowed like an ember, fragile yet unyielding, carrying life forward through the longest winters the earth had ever known. In the bitter cold of the Ice Age, a baby's life hung on the edge of every breath. The winters were not seasons to endure casually. They were battles fought every single night. Tiny bodies were fragile, unable to hold warmth for long, and frostbite could creep in before parents even realized how cold the air had grown. In this unforgiving world, human love and ingenuity became the most powerful tools for survival. Every parent understood instinctively that warmth was not simply about comfort, it was life itself. Parents shielded their babies with layers of fur and skin, carefully gathered from the animals they hunted. Soft hides of reindeer and mammoth, lined with tufts of down or grass, became the first cradles. These wraps trapped heat close to a baby's body, creating a barrier against the icy wind. Unlike adults, who could move around to stay warm, infants relied entirely on being held, bundled, and protected. A mother would rarely set her child down in the cold, even to sleep. The baby stayed pressed against her chest or tucked under her arm, sharing her body's warmth. This closeness was more than instinct. It was essential to keep the child alive through long winter nights. But warmth was not just a matter of fur or fire. It was about constant vigilance. A baby's skin cooled far faster than that of a grown man or woman. Fingers and toes could turn numb in minutes if left uncovered, so parents learned to check their babies repeatedly through the night, feeling their cheeks and hands in the dim glow of firelight. A warm baby meant safety. A cold baby meant danger. Fathers, too, shared this responsibility, holding infants close inside heavy cloaks or against their bare chests when mothers were weary. In this world, family was not divided into separate roles of protector and nurturer. Everyone was both. The shelters where these families lived were designed with warmth in mind. Caves, when they could be found, provided a natural defense against the wind, their stone walls acting as a shield. In open ground, huts were built from branches, bones, and hides, then sealed with snow to block drafts. The fire in the center burned low and steady, tended through the night so it would never fail. Parents positioned their babies in the warmest place, away from smoke but close enough to feel the gentle heat. They learned to manage this balance carefully, because too much heat dried the air and irritated tiny lungs, while too little heat meant shivering and danger. Frostbite was a silent threat. When the night grew colder than expected, parents drew their babies into their own bedding, holding them skin to skin under layers of fur. The steady rhythm of a heartbeat and the shared breath between mother and child created warmth no winter wind could steal. It was a form of care that required no tools, only the closeness of human bodies. Over time, this intimate way of sleeping became part of human nature, passed down through generations, until it became instinct. Even today, when we no longer face the same deadly cold, babies still sleep best against the warmth of a parent's body, a deep memory of ancient nights spent huddled in the dark. Parents also made clever use of the resources around them. They lined cradles with dried grass to insulate against cold ground, placed warm stones near bedding after heating them by the fire, and used animal fat on exposed skin to prevent frostbite. The same reindeer that provided food also gave hide soft enough to swaddle a baby, and the same mammoth bones used to frame a hut could shield a sleeping area from wind. This careful use of nature's gifts meant that no part of a hunted animal was wasted, because each piece had a role in protecting life. Even during travel, when families moved to follow herds or escape harsher weather, babies were never left vulnerable. Mothers fashioned slings from hide or woven fibers, wearing their children across the chest or back where warmth from movement and breath kept them comfortable. When storms forced families to stop and make camp in the open, these slings became makeshift nests, keeping the baby cocooned inside layers of fur while adults worked to build shelter. Fathers walked with children bundled inside their cloaks, their own bodies serving as living shields against the cold wind. In the dead of winter, when temperatures plunged to their lowest, families often slept pressed tightly together. Grandparents, parents, and children shared one sleeping space, their combined body heat creating a circle of life around the youngest members. The baby, at the center, was the most carefully guarded. This practice not only kept infants warm, but strengthened family bonds, as everyone became attuned to the needs of the smallest. In the silence of night, when the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the low murmur of breath, a single restless whimper from the baby would stir the entire family awake. Protecting the child was never just the mother's duty. It was the work of every person who loved the child and understood that the tribe's future rested in that tiny form. Some nights were harsher than others. Blizzards swept across the land, howling through valleys and rattling even the strongest shelters. On these nights, fires burned brighter, cloaks were pulled tighter, and no one slept deeply. Parents whispered softly to calm their children, using rhythmic humming or the gentle rocking motion of their arms. Though there were no lullabies as we know them today, the quiet human voice, steady and warm, was enough to soothe a frightened infant. Babies relaxed to the sound of familiar heartbeats, and in that safety, they drifted to sleep even as the world outside raged with cold and darkness. Over countless generations, these methods of keeping babies warm became instinctual. Early humans didn't think of it as a technique or a skill to be learned. It was simply part of life. They understood that a calm, warm baby was a healthy baby, and a healthy baby gave the tribe strength. More children surviving meant more hands to gather food, more voices to share stories, and more hearts to carry knowledge into the future. The care lavished on infants during these freezing nights was not just tenderness, it was the foundation of human survival. The fight against frostbite and chill shaped human behavior in ways we still carry today. The need to protect the most vulnerable taught our ancestors to stay close, to share warmth, to value cooperation over solitude. Even without words, these lessons were passed from parent to child, generation to generation, becoming part of who we are. The love that held babies close in the cold is the same love that binds families now, even in a world far removed the Ice Age. Back then, it was not an option to let a baby sleep alone. Survival required closeness, and closeness built the roots of our humanity. In every flicker of firelight, in every fur-lined cradle, in every heartbeat pressed against a tiny chest, early humans declared their defiance against the cold. They refused to let frost claim what love had given. The long winters taught them to be watchful, inventive, and endlessly protective, and because of their care, those fragile infants, warm, calm, and safe, grew strong enough to face a world that tested every living thing. It is no exaggeration to say that the human race endured the Ice Age, not through tools or weapons alone, but through the warmth parents gave their children, night after frozen night. In the heart of the Ice Age, when nights stretched long and the air turned sharp enough to sting the lungs, human parents found ways to cradle their infants in safety. The cold was relentless, and every parent knew that the smallest members of their family were the most at risk. Babies could not protect themselves from frost or wind. Their bodies were fragile, their skin tender, their warmth fleeting. To help them sleep soundly through these brutal nights, our ancestors fashioned the first bedding, simple, resourceful, and filled with love. There were no woven blankets or soft fabrics in those days. Instead, parents turned to the animals they hunted, using fur and hide as nature's gift of insulation. Reindeer hide, soft and pliable, lined the first cradles. Mammoth wool, with its dense undercoat, was pressed and dried to make padding that stayed warm even when the air was bitterly cold. Fox pelts and hare skins, with their silky texture, cushioned an infant's resting place. Nothing was wasted. Every part of a hunted animal served a purpose, and protecting the youngest was among the highest of them. A cradle then was not the swinging wooden frame we imagine today. Sometimes it was nothing more than a hollowed space in the shelter's floor, lined with soft grass and animal skin to keep the baby off the frozen ground. Other times it was a bundle, a carefully tied pouch of fur, carrying the scent of smoke and hearth, where the baby could be swaddled and tucked against a parent's body or laid beside a fire. Mothers and fathers created these soft nests by layering materials: dried moss for softness, woven reeds for structure, and fur for warmth. The result was a cradle that was both portable and protective, a cocoon against the cold. Even when families travelled across icy plains to follow the great herds, these bedding arrangements went with them. A fur cradle could be carried on the mother's back or at her side, close to her own body heat. When the tribe stopped to rest, parents set the cradle near the fire, away from smoke, but within the gentle circle of warmth. Infants slept soundly in these nests, their breathing steady, their small fingers curling against the soft lining. The world outside might be howling with wind and snow, but inside the cradle, life was quiet, calm, and secure. These makeshift beds were more than just a place to sleep. They were tools of survival. By keeping babies warm and still, parents conserved their energy and reduced the constant danger of cold stress. Babies who slept well grew stronger, nursed better, and were less likely to fall ill. And for the parents, knowing their child was safe allowed them to rest too, even if only in brief moments before waking to tend the fire again. The fur cradles also absorbed and held the scent of the family, something that comforted the infant. Long before humans understood scent in scientific terms, they knew its emotional power. A baby laid in a nest smelling of mother and father slept more peacefully, less likely to stir at every sound. The warmth of the fur, combined with this familiar scent, created a sense of security in a world that otherwise offered none. Parents instinctively understood that calm sleep meant survival, and they did everything to make these soft nests as comforting as possible. When supplies were scarce, ingenuity filled the gaps. If large hides were unavailable, parents used smaller scraps stitched together with sinew, lined with feathers plucked from birds. If they lacked fur entirely, they piled dry grasses and reeds, pressing them into mats, then covering them with whatever cloth or leather they could find. Sometimes they heated smooth stones in the fire and wrapped them in animal hide, placing them near the cradle to radiate a gentle warmth through the night. These simple innovations showed that survival was never only about strength, it was about care, observation, and creativity. Fur cradles were also designed for movement. When the family needed to travel through snowfields or forests, the cradle became part of the parent's clothing, strapped to the chest or back, so the infant never left the shelter of body heat. This way, the baby's nest was always with them at the campfire, on the trail, in the midst of hunting grounds. Such closeness shaped not only the infant's sense of security, but also the emotional bond between parent and child. The warmth of fur, the steady rocking motion of walking, and the ever-present rhythm of a heartbeat lulled babies into deep, calm sleep. On stormy nights when snow piled high outside and winds roared like wild beasts, parents reinforced the cradle's protection. Extra hides were laid over the baby's nest, creating a layered shield against sudden drafts. Mothers slept with the cradle beside them, or even pulled the entire nest under their own coverings, forming a shared bed where warmth mingled freely. This closeness protected against frostbite, which could strike silently in the coldest hours. Fingers, toes, and ears were checked often. If they felt cold to the touch, the baby was brought skin to the mother or father until the warmth returned. These small acts of care, simple, quiet, repeated endlessly, made the difference between life and death. Over generations, these practices became instinctive. Parents didn't need to think about how to make a nest warm, simply knew. They chose the softest materials by touch, lined cradles carefully to avoid dampness, and adjusted layers as the seasons changed. In spring, lighter furs allowed airflow, while in the depth of winter, heavy hides sealed in precious heat. Even the positioning of the cradle was deliberate, never on bare ground, always elevated or insulated to avoid cold seeping up from below. By observing nature and learning from experience, early humans developed an unspoken science of infant care that worked without words or measurement. These fur cradles and soft nests also shaped human culture. Families that kept their babies warm and calm had more children survive, strengthening the tribe. This success reinforced the habit, passing it down not as instruction but as tradition. Parents copied what they had seen their own mothers and fathers do, improving it with every generation. They learned which furs stayed soft, which dried fastest when wet, and which cradles could be built quickly in emergencies. The knowledge was shared around fires at night, in the same shelters where the babies slept peacefully, unaware of the danger outside. Even predators lurking in the dark learned to avoid the warm circle of human firelight. But parents never trusted that safety completely. The cradle was kept close, always within arm's reach, so that if danger came suddenly, the baby could be lifted in an instant. The cradle's portability, its softness, and its warmth all worked together to give infants the greatest chance of survival in a world that seemed determined to test human endurance at every turn. In these soft nests, babies drifted off to sleep to the muffled sounds of crackling fires and murmured voices. They slept through long nights while snowflakes spun outside like silent ghosts. They slept knowing nothing of the cold, shielded from it by layers of fur, by the careful hands of parents, and by the endless vigilance of family love. These quiet cradles were humanity's first nurseries, simple, beautiful, and profoundly effective. They kept not only babies alive, but entire lineages alive, ensuring that the story of humanity would continue long past those frozen winters. The calm that settled over a sleeping child in those nests carried more than comfort, it carried hope. Every tiny breath meant that the warmth was enough, that the nest had done its work, that love had triumphed once again over the cold night. In this way, fur cradles and soft nests became symbols of human resilience. They were humble creations, yet they embodied the deepest truth of survival. that care for the smallest is what makes the human spirit endure. The fire, the hides, the soft grass beneath, these were not luxuries but lifeline, and because parents never failed to build them, humanity woke to see the dawn, again and again, until the Ice Age finally loosened its grip on the earth. The nights during the Ice Age were long and unforgiving. The wind crept through even the smallest cracks in a cave wall or hide shelter, whispering warnings that the cold outside could kill. For a baby, that cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was deadly. Their tiny bodies lost heat in minutes, and their fragile hearts beat too fast to keep up with the hunger for warmth. Early human mothers learned, not through books or advice but by pure instinct, that the safest place for a newborn was pressed against the warmth of her own skin, close enough that the baby could hear her heartbeat echoing like a steady drum in the silence of the night. This was not an invention or a parenting style, it was survival. Babies who were kept at a distance, even if wrapped in furs, risked growing cold without anyone noticing. A mother's chest was the perfect cradle, warm, soft, alive. Her body heat kept the infant's temperature steady. Her breathing created a rhythm that calmed their restless cries. Her heartbeat, that deep, slow thrum beneath the ribs, was the sound the child had known before birth, and now it became the lullaby of the frozen world. Night after night, babies drifted to sleep against that gentle pulse, comforted by its familiarity. The shelters of that time, huts made of mammoth bones covered with hides, deep caves lit by smoky fires, low domes of branches and earth, were never truly warm. Fires could take the edge off the cold, but they needed constant tending, and embers faded quickly when families slept too deeply. In those hours, a mother's arms became the only true source of heat that never failed. She curled her body around her baby as though nature had designed her that way, shielding tiny fingers and toes from icy drafts. The closeness let her sense every stir, every sigh, every change in the child's breathing. If the baby's chest rose too fast, if the skin felt cool, she would wake instantly and pull the infant closer still. This closeness shaped both mother and child. A baby held against the skin would feed easily in the night without ever fully waking. There were no cries echoing through the dark because hunger was answered before it became desperate. The mother's own sleep was light, but it was steady, guided by the child's needs. And in return, the baby learned early that the world, harsh though it was, began and ended in safety. That sense of safety was not just emotional, it was physical. Calm infants breathe more evenly, their hearts beat more steadily, and they grow stronger. Our ancestors didn't need to understand the science to see the results. Babies who slept against their mothers survived more often than those laid aside, and so the practice became universal, passed down not as instruction but as an unspoken law of love. When families travelled, trudging through snow that reached to their knees, or across plains swept bare by bitter winds, the mother carried her baby bound in a sling of hide or fur, tight to her chest. Her own body was the baby's shelter, the baby's world. Even while she worked, gathering wood, scraping hides, preparing food, the infant rested there, heart pressed to heart. At night, the same closeness continued. Whether they were in a cave or under a temporary lean-to, there was never a question of where the baby would sleep. The cradle of arms and heartbeat was always ready, needing no construction and no extra tools, only the warmth of the human body and the will to protect. The steady beat of a mother's heart also gave comfort that no inanimate cradle could. For 9 months, the baby had grown in the womb with that rhythm surrounding it like music. After birth, the world was full of strange sounds, cracking ice, distant howls of wolves, wind screaming through stone, the unfamiliar crackle of fire. But pressed against the mother's chest, the baby heard the same familiar thudding it had always known. It was reassurance that the world outside might be fierce, but love and warmth were near. The crying stopped more quickly. The limbs relaxed. The tiny body went limp in deep, peaceful sleep. This peace allowed the mother to rest too, even if lightly, knowing that the sound and feel of her baby against her own heart would wake her at once if anything changed. Sometimes fathers or older siblings also shared this closeness. In the coldest weather, families slept in a tight cluster, bodies pressed together, so the infant had warmth from every side. But even then, the place of honor was always against the mother's chest. She alone carried the heartbeat the baby recognized, and her milk meant she never needed to pass the infant away for long. If she fell ill or exhausted, other family members could take over, holding the child to their own warmth. But the baby always settled more quickly when returned to the familiar rhythm of mother's breath and pulse. Generations of this nightly closeness shaped human instincts. Mothers learned to wake at the faintest rustle, to soothe with a touch before a cry could fully rise, to shift a blanket or fur covering without letting cold air in. Babies learn to associate the smell and warmth of skin with safety, their tiny hands gripping instinctively, their ears tuned to the soft beat of the heart beneath. It wasn't a method, it wasn't even a choice, it was simply how life worked, because life demanded it. Even the fireside arrangements of Ice Age shelters reflected this need. The central fire burned low through the night, with families gathered around it, and the mother lay closest to its warmth, while still keeping her infant against her own body. If sparks rose or smoke thickened, she could shift quickly without disturbing the child. She learned to balance her own comfort against the infant's safety, never sleeping so deeply that she failed to notice a change in the baby's warmth or breathing. This light, protective sleep is something mothers carry even today, an ancient gift inherited from those who lived when every night could be dangerous. Sometimes the weather forced entire groups to huddle close, their bodies forming walls against the cold wind sneaking into the shelter. Babies resting on their mothers' chests dozed peacefully while storms screamed outside. In the morning, when frost clung to the walls and breath hung in the air like smoke, the infants would wake warm-fed and calm. Their survival was a quiet triumph celebrated not with words, but with relieved smiles and soft caresses, proof that the old ways still worked. This constant contact through the night did more than keep babies alive. It built the foundations of trust and love that define our species. A baby who felt the steady heartbeat of its mother grew knowing that the world would answer its needs, that comfort was never far away. This early sense of security shaped how humans learned to care for one another, to form forms that went beyond survival. The same arms that held infants close around the fire became arms that protected the tribe, hunted for food, and built shelters together. In caring for the smallest so carefully, early humans learned to care for everyone. The rhythm of mother and child breathing in unison became a rhythm of humanity itself. It was not just warmth or hunger that kept them pressed close through the night. It was the oldest language in the world, the quiet assurance that someone would always listen, always hold on, always protect. In the darkest winters, when the earth seemed made only of ice and shadow, that heartbeat became a promise that morning would come, and life would go on. Babies slept through those long nights, not knowing the danger outside, because they were cradled in the safest sound they had ever known, the thrum of a mother's heart. And so night after night, the practice continued, unbroken for thousands of years. Through migrations and bitter storms, through hunger and firelight, infants slept with their ears pressed to the steady beat that had guided them even before birth. It was not comfort alone, it was survival wrapped in love, love wrapped in instinct, instinct wrapped in fur against the cold. In this way, humanity's smallest members made it through the Ice Age winters, carried always close, sleeping to the soft music of life itself. The nights of early humans were long, cold, and restless. Winter wrapped the world in silence, broken only by the distant cry of wolves, or the groaning of trees heavy with snow. Inside caves or shelters, the heart of survival glowed low and red. The fire. It was not just a source of heat, it was life itself, a fragile thread between warmth and death, especially for the smallest and most vulnerable of the tribe. For an infant whose body could not hold its own heat, fire was both protector and danger. Parents learned to balance its gift with great care, because a spark too close could wound the child they sought to save, and a flame too far could let the creeping cold take its toll. The fire was never left alone. Someone always watched over it, adding wood, coaxing embers into flame. Mothers, nursing their babies by the glowing coals, learned to shift just enough to keep smoke from the child's face while still stealing the warmth. Too near, and the infant might overheat or inhale sparks. Too far, and the baby's skin would grow cold and pale. their breath shallow. This was an unspoken skill, not taught in words but learned in the rhythm of nights spent listening to both fire and baby breathing. The soft crackle of burning wood became the backdrop to the heartbeat of life cradled in a mother's arms. When the tribe settled down to sleep, the fire burned low but steady. Infants stayed pressed against their mothers or fathers, wrapped in fur bundles, while the faint warmth from the fire reached them like a distant sun. Families lay in circles, often with babies in the innermost spot, shielded by adult bodies from drafts or stray sparks. It was a delicate balance, one that required instinct as sharp as any spear. The parents' bodies gave direct warmth, while the fire kept the air from turning deadly cold, creating a protective halo around the sleeping group. Firelight itself offered more than heat. Its soft glow painted the stone walls, calming the night with familiar shapes. For infants too young to see clearly, the light and shadow still created a gentle rhythm, a world where nothing jumped suddenly out of the darkness. The slow rise and fall of the flames was like breathing. Mothers hummed low, soft sounds that blended with the crackle, turning the cold silence outside into something almost musical. These were not lullabies in the modern sense, but the beginnings of them, a voice mingling with firelight to reassure a child that all was well. Keeping an infant warm was more than wrapping them in skins. Parents learned to position themselves so their own bodies blocked the cold air that seeped in. They adjusted the fire constantly, sometimes waking every hour to place another stick on the ember. In times of scarcity, when fuel was low, the fire was made small but carefully tended so it never died. In such nights, the baby's warmth came mostly from human closeness, with the fire adding only a thin edge of comfort. Yet even a thin edge could mean survival. The difference between a bitter night and a deadly one could be as little as the faint heat rising from a handful of glowing coals. The fire also kept predators away, but it was a double-edged gift. If flames roared too high, they could frighten prey from nearby hunting grounds, or attract curious eyes from other tribes. If left unattended, a single spark could scorch precious bedding or a wandering child. So parents, even when exhausted, learned to sleep lightly, waking at the smallest change in the fire's voice. The hiss of sap, the sudden shift of wood, the drop of ash on stone, all were signals, just like the rustle of their baby's breathing. This watchfulness became instinct. Sometimes in the heart of winter, the tribe would build 2 small fires instead of one large one, setting them at opposite sides of the sleeping circle. The warmth spread more evenly, and no one lay dangerously close. Infants, always in the center, benefited most. Their fur wrappings were turned often so no moisture lingered, because dampness was a greater enemy than cold itself. The faint smoke from the fires even served a hidden purpose. It kept insects and pests away, though winter drove most such nuisances into hiding. Firelight became part of the child's earliest memories, though they would not remember them consciously. The dim glow flickering across their mother's face, the smell of wood smoke mixed with warm skin, the soft pulse of heat when the wind outside roared, these sensations shaped a baby's first sense of safety. Parents, too, found comfort in watching the coals. In that light, they could see the small rise and fall of a chest, the relaxed face of their child asleep, reassured that warmth held steady through the night. Traveling families had to carry fire with them. A bundle of smouldering embers, wrapped in dry bark or animal dung, kept a spark alive through long marches. At night, even before building a shelter, the first task was to coax those embers back to flame. Babies were settled last, after the fire was ready, ensuring that no time was wasted in the open cold. Some mothers carried infants against their bare skin beneath thick furs, so that even before fire was kindled, the baby remained warm. The first breath of warmth from a rekindled fire always brought deep relief, not just for the adults who knew its value, but for the infants who sensed the change through the body heat of their mothers. Balancing warmth with safety became a finely tuned skill passed from generation to generation. Parents learned that fire should never be so close it scorched a sleeping fur or startled an infant with sudden heat. They learned to bank the fire, pushing the largest logs to the edges so the middle glowed steadily, rather than flare. This created an even, gentle warmth like the sun hidden behind clouds, a constant background instead of bursts of heat and cold. Babies thrived in such steady conditions, their tiny bodies able to rest without stress. Fire was more than a tool, it was a companion. The sound of it blended with the whispers of families as they lay down to sleep. A baby nestled in a mother's arms would hear her voice vibrate softly in her chest as she spoke to others around the fire, hear the laughter of older siblings, the low hum of fathers discussing tomorrow's hunt. This sense of life and community, all bound together by that circle of warmth, seeped into the infant's bones even as they slept. It was warmth not only of body, but of spirit. Through centuries this pattern shaped humanity. Babies survived cold winters because parents mastered the art of firelight, keeping it alive, keeping it gentle, making it safe. The knowledge was never written down, yet it lived in every watchful glance at the coals, every hand that reached out in darkness to shift a log. It lived in the way mothers turned their babies in their arms to shield them from smoke, in the way fathers kept silent watch when others slept, adding fuel so the warmth never failed. It lived in the shared responsibility of tribes who knew that the youngest must be guarded first, because they carried the future. Even now, long after stone shelters and fur bedding have been replaced by walls and blankets, that ancient instinct lingered. Parents still check on their babies at night, adjusting covers, touching foreheads, listening for steady breaths, much like they once checked the fire. The memory of those Ice Age nights is deep in human blood, the knowledge that life is fragile, that warmth is sacred, that love keeps watch as surely as any flame. And so, long ago, as snow fell outside and wolves prowled in the dark, early human families lay close by their fires, their babies safe and warm. The firelight flickered on stone walls and fur bedding, casting gentle shadows. The parents' tired eyes stayed half open, always aware, always ready. Between the steady heartbeat of mother and father and the careful glow of the fire, infants slept peacefully, unaware of how much care it took to keep them safe. This delicate balance between warmth and safety, learned by instinct and love, carried humanity through the coldest nights the earth had ever known. The Ice Age night was long and deep, a darkness that swallowed everything outside the fragile ring of firelight. Wind moaned through cracks in stone shelters, or the seams of huts made of mammoth bone and hide. Inside, families huddled together to survive, and at the heart of this warmth lay the most vulnerable life of all, the infant pressed close to its mother's chest. Long before soft beds and heated rooms, long before woolen blankets and quiet cradles, a mother's body was the only steady source of warmth and nourishment for her baby. When hunger stirred the child in the middle of the night, no matter how bitter the air or how heavy the snow outside, the mother always responded. Night feeding was not a choice, it was a lifeline. In those ancient winters, mothers learned to keep their babies next to their bodies even in sleep, wrapped beneath layers of fur and hide, so their skin never noticed the freezing air. A baby's tiny body loses heat far faster than an adult's, so every heartbeat, every breath, every ounce of warmth from the mother's skin helped the child survive. When hunger woke the infant, the mother did not need to rise and move to some distant corner. There were no separate sleeping spaces, no cold wooden floors to cross. The baby was already there against her chest, able to root and nurse without delay. This closeness was both practical and protective. The mother barely stirred, the baby barely cried. Night feeding happened in the quiet rhythm of shared warmth, without breaking the cocoon of safety the family had built. Mothers knew instinctively how to shield their infants from the cold as they fed them. Before latching the baby, they loosened only as much of the wrapping as needed, never exposing the child's body to the night air. The thick hides they slept under held in heat, like a living cave, and within that pocket of warmth, the baby's face pressed close to its mother's breast, where the scent and softness guided it even in darkness. Milk flowed warm from her body, warmer than any breath of wind, and as the infant drank, its tiny hands curled against her skin. The mother often wrapped her own fur cloak around both of them, creating a seal of heat, while the distant fire offered just enough glow to see outlines, but not enough to dry the air or parch the skin. Sometimes mothers sat up to nurse, but more often they learned to feed while lying down, turning onto their sides or cradling the baby across their stomach. This way neither mother nor child fully woke, and they conserved precious energy in the bitterest cold. A mother might even tuck her infant inside her own clothing or beneath her layers of fur, so that their bodies touched skin to skin. This was not merely comfort. It was survival. Human milk is not only food but also a source of warmth when given directly, and the contact kept the baby's temperature steady while also keeping the mother's chest warm and ready to produce milk. Night feeding was not done in isolation. Fathers, siblings, and elders all had roles to play in protecting this moment. Others in the shelter would wake briefly to adjust the fire or shift bedding, making sure no cold draft reached the nursing pair. Some fathers draped their own hides across the mother's back as she fed, keeping her shoulders warm so she did not shiver and disturb the infant. Older children sometimes lay curled around the pair, adding their own body heat to the sleeping nest. This circle of care meant that even in darkness, when danger prowled outside and the wind howled through the trees, the baby remained at the center of human warmth, fed and comforted without fear. The feeding itself was slow and quiet. There were no lanterns, no chatter, no bustling about. The only sounds were the soft suckling of the infant, the mother's slow breathing, and the faint crackle of embers as someone nudged the fire. In this half-sleep, mother and child became attuned to one another. The baby's restless stirring brought milk even before it cried. The mother's body responded to every tiny sound and movement, releasing warmth and nourishment on instinct. This constant closeness through the night not only kept the baby alive, but also strengthened the bond between them. The baby learned that hunger would always be met with warmth and comfort, that cold and fear could be soothed by touch and milk. When the mother herself grew chilled, she did not move the baby away. Instead, she pulled the furs tighter and leaned closer to the fire's gentle heat. Some mothers warmed stones near the fire and wrapped them in hide, tucking them close to their feet or along their backs to keep their own bodies comfortable while they fed. The same stones, once cooled to a safe temperature, might be placed near the baby's bedding after feeding to keep the nest warm. But direct human contact was always the most reliable source of warmth. Stones cooled, fires dwindled, but a mother's body never ceased to generate heat for her child. This ancient rhythm of night feeding had another hidden benefit. By keeping babies calm and quiet through the night, it protected the entire tribe. A hungry baby wailing in the darkness could draw predators or alert rival groups, but when the infant stayed pressed to its mother, nursing as soon as hunger began, the cries were soft and brief, quickly soothed. In this way, the act of nursing at night not only nourished the baby, but safeguarded everyone sleeping nearby. In harsh winters, food was often scarce for the adults, but mothers ate whenever they could, knowing that their strength directly fed their infants. Tribe members often saved the fattest meat and richest marrow for nursing mothers, understanding instinctively that a well-fed mother meant a thriving baby. When food was meager, mothers still made milk, though it might be leaner, and their own bodies grew thinner. The tribe's elders sometimes shared special knowledge, teas of pine needles, rich in vitamin C, or roasted seeds mixed with fat, that helped mothers stay nourished in lean times. These practices ensured that even in famine, night feeding continued, giving infants the best chance at survival. Milk itself adapted to the cold season. Modern studies show that a mother's milk changes in composition depending on the baby's needs. In ancient times, this meant milk often became richer in fat during the winter, providing not only calories, but also insulation against the cold. Babies who fed frequently through the night stayed plump and warm, their small bodies cushioned against frost. Mothers may not have understood the science, but they saw the results. Babies who nursed often were calmer, healthier, and better able to face the bitter cold. Sometimes, when mothers were ill or too weak to feed, another nursing woman in the tribe would take the baby to her own breast. This shared feeding, or milk kinship, ensured that no child went hungry in the night. Families treated this as natural and necessary, and it bound the tribe together even more strongly. A baby passed from mother to aunt, or grandmother to older sister, never left the circle of warmth and care, even while asleep. The night was not divided into mine and yours. All children were precious to the group, and feeding them was a shared duty. Over countless generations, this practice shaped human nature. Babies fed through the night, close to their mother's warmth, grew up calm and secure. Their bodies learned to regulate heat, their immune systems strengthened, and their hearts were steadied by the rhythmic sound of breathing and heartbeat. This closeness also influenced human society, fostering deep family bonds and cooperation. By keeping infants warm and quiet, night feeding allowed the whole group to sleep in peace, gathering strength to face the next day's hunt or the next move through snow-covered valleys. Even in the smallest details, early mothers were resourceful. They learned to keep their hair or fur garments from brushing across the baby's face during feeding, to prevent chills from moisture. They kept smoke from the fire from settling too heavily on their infants by choosing positions where air flowed gently. They made sure that no fur lining turned damp with milk, drying bedding by the fire when needed, so that mold or cold would not harm the child. Every small adjustment showed how much thought and care went into the simple act of nursing in the middle of a frozen night. Though these mothers never wrote down their wisdom, they passed it on by example. A young girl would watch her mother or aunt nurse a baby while lying under furs, see how they adjusted the infant with one hand while shielding the cold with the other. She would hear the whispered songs used to calm restless babies, see the way the fire was tended just before feeding time. By the time she became a mother herself, these lessons were as natural as breathing. Through all of this, the love between mother and child was the constant flame. In the darkness, the mother's body gave food, warmth, and comfort all at once. The baby's small size and gentle movements reassured her, even in her exhaustion. Together they survived the long, cruel nights of the Ice Age, not through great inventions or tools, but through closeness, patience, and the steady heartbeat of human care. The Ice Age nights stretched endlessly, a quiet darkness broken only by the distant cry of wolves and the low whisper of wind moving across frozen ground. Inside the narrow shelter of a cave or the rounded frame of a hide-covered hut, a baby stirred, restless from cold or hunger or the weight of unfamiliar dreams. The adults slept in a circle, protecting one another from the night, but the baby's small whimper reached its mother before it reached anyone else. Even before the child cried, she sensed the subtle shift of its breathing, the faint tightening of tiny fists. She woke not with alarm, but with the calm instinct born of generations of mothers who had done the same, and with movements as smooth as flowing water, she gathered the child close. In that still world, soothing a baby did not come with music boxes or gentle recorded song. It came from the rhythm of life itself, the sway of a mother's body, the pulse of her heartbeat, the hum of voices that carried through the dark like a warm hand. The first rocking cradles were not carved from wood or suspended by cords. They were the arms of parents, the steady sway of hips as a mother shifted from side to side, or the soft vibration of a chest as a father hummed low and tuneless into the top of the baby's head. Early humans learned without teaching that infants were calmed by rhythm long before they knew the word. They knew the effect. The heartbeat in the womb was a drumbeat of safety, the rush of blood a steady rain of sound, and the baby, born into a world of sharp winds and shifting light, longed for the same steady patterns. So mothers and fathers rocked and swayed, their movements slow and deliberate, as if returning the baby to the motion of being carried inside. They never worried whether the child would grow used to it. Survival required comfort, and comfort required movement. Even when mothers were exhausted from long days of gathering roots or scraping hides, they held their babies close and swayed gently to quiet them. Sometimes they sat by the low fire, not to sing words but to hum vibrations that soothed without meaning. These sounds were not melodies as we think of them today, but deep repetitive tones, like the distant growl of wind through stone, or the steady call of night birds. Babies learned that these sounds meant warmth and safety, that someone was awake and near. The rocking was not a frantic motion, but a slow, pendulum-like sway that matched the human heartbeat, something ancient and consistent across every tribe and every winter. Fathers, too, knew these rhythms. When a mother's arms grew tired, she passed the baby to her mate, or to a grandmother nearby. Even the strong hunters of the tribe, who could silence a charging animal with a single spear thrust, became as gentle as leaves in the wind when they held their infants. They would cradle the baby against their chest, feeling the fragile ribs rise and fall, and walk small circles in the dim glow of the fire. The crunch of feet on packed earth, the muffled sound of hide brushing against hide, became lullabies of their own. These men did not sing to impress or entertain. They murmured to reassure, repeating soft, wordless syllables that carried only love and patience. Sometimes the tribe's older women would add their voices in a quiet chant. These were not formal songs, but murmurs of comfort, passed down like recipes, short patterns of sound, easy to repeat and soft on the ear. A baby, nestled against a shoulder, would feel the vibration of these voices through the bones of the adults holding them, the rhythm running deeper than words. Even siblings, barely older than the baby themselves, learned to calm a fussing infant by tapping gently on its back, or bouncing it on their knees to the same pulse that guided the mother's sway. Rhythm surrounded early humans in nature, and they copied it without even knowing. The drip of melting snow from a cave roof, the steady beat of feet trudging through frost, the repeated calls of night insects when winter eased for a brief thaw. All these sounds became part of the way parents instinctively soothed their children. A mother might rock her baby in time with the crackle of the fire, or whisper with the rise and fall of the wind, letting the child hear that the world outside had its own patterns, and that danger did not always mean chaos. Carrying babies during the day reinforced these rhythms. Infants spent nearly every moment pressed against a parent's chest or hip, wrapped in hide or fur slings. They learned the pace of human footsteps, the sway of hips during walking, the way a body leans and shifts while gathering food or tending a fire. At night, when mothers rocked them in the same way, it felt familiar. This continuity meant babies rarely cried for long. They trusted the motion, trusted the deep hum of breath and voice. Even the faint vibrations of a father's low murmur, or the soft rasp of a grandmother's hand patting a hide blanket, could calm them, because the sounds were consistent with life, not jarring or strange. Sometimes, when the weather was bitterly cold and the family stayed inside for many days, mothers would sit in small groups with their infants, feeding and rocking together. The overlapping hums and murmurs created a chorus of sound that was less a song than a shared heartbeat. These gatherings not only calmed the babies, but also reassured the mothers. They exchanged glances, shared warmth, and passed along wisdom about holding a restless infant just so, about patting in time with a breathing rhythm, about swaying until the baby's eyes drifted closed. The soothing of infants was never an individual task. It was a communal act of love and protection. The gentle movement did more than help babies sleep. It kept them alive. A restless, crying baby burned precious energy and body heat, dangerous in a freezing world. So parents learned to quiet infants before their distress grew loud. The sway of a body, the hum of a voice, the vibration of a chest, were tools as essential as fire or fur. These instincts were so reliable that even when the tribe traveled at night, carrying torches to move to safer ground, mothers continued to rock their babies against their bodies, walking with a careful rhythm that lulled the child back into slumber, despite the cold wind biting at their faces. These ancient practices planted seeds that would shape human culture for tens of thousands of years. The rocking and humming, born of survival, later grew into lullabies and cradle songs, but in the beginning they were simple, wordless, and deeply human. The babies did not need lyrics. They only needed to feel the pulse of life around them, to know they were not alone in the dark. The comforting rhythm was the same whether it came from a mother's swaying steps, a father's chest rumble, or the quiet chant of an elder. The night held no clock, no schedule, only this endless patience. Feed, rock, hum, breathe. The child slept, and the tribe rested with it, knowing that calm babies meant safe nights. The memory of these moments passed silently through generations. A girl watching her mother rock an infant by the fire would mimic the motion with her own dolls of bundled grass and hide. By the time she grew old enough to carry a sibling, she already knew how to sway in the right rhythm, how to hush with the right sound. When she became a mother herself, no one had to instruct her in these ancient arts. They lived in her bones, in the deep remembering of humankind. The rocking, the rhythms, the soothing sounds were not inventions but inheritances, carved into human instinct like tracks in snow. And through countless winters, these quiet gestures kept fragile newborns warm, calm, and alive. The night in the Ice Age was long and merciless, a living thing with teeth and claws of its own. Cold winds prowled over open ground, curling into cracks and openings, testing every cave and hut for weakness. In that world, a sleeping infant was the tribe's most fragile treasure. One careless moment, one draught of icy air, or one hungry predator nosing too close, could end a life before it had truly begun. So the tribe learned, generation after generation, to guard its smallest members with the kind of vigilance that never fully slept. It was not fear alone that kept them awake. It was love braided with instinct, as strong as sinew and as deep as the marrow of their bones. Mothers slept lightly, waking at the faintest change in their baby's breathing. They kept their infants pressed close, wrapped in layers of fur, their own bodies forming the first barrier against the cold and the last line of defense against danger. The mother's warmth was not enough by itself on nights when frost glittered on every surface, and the fire's glow could not reach every shadow, so fathers, grandmothers, and older siblings formed rings around them. A sleeping circle was more than comfort. It was a living fortress. Those who rested on the outer edges kept an ear turned outward, attuned to the rustle of paws in snow or the snapping of twigs that might signal a predator nearby. Even the tribe's hunting dogs or half-wild companions shared the duty, growling low at scents of wolves or cave lions long before human ears could catch the danger. The shelters themselves were chosen with this purpose in mind. A cave with only one entrance was prized, because it could be watched by a single sentry through the night, the firelight making it harder for animals to approach unseen. When no cave was available, families built windbreaks from mammoth bones, hides, and branches, always with a mind to how the air would flow and where an infant could sleep most securely. Babies were placed in the warmest hollow of the shelter, where the breath of many bodies and the glow of embers kept the cold from creeping in. If a draft appeared, someone would block it with a hide, their own body, or even the carcass of an animal brought down earlier that day, because nothing mattered more than stopping that invisible killer, the bitter, seeping cold that could chill a baby's small lungs before dawn. The tribe did not rely on vigilance alone. They relied on cunning. Fires were never allowed to go completely out at night. Even if the flames were banked low to avoid smoke or sparks, glowing coals remained, sending out steady heat and light. The smell of fire and the human scent clinging to every hide discouraged many predators from coming too close. But mothers knew that no barrier was perfect. A curious hyena, a desperate wolf, or even a starving bear might test the edge of the camp. So infants were never left exposed. They were swaddled deep in furs, their tiny faces shielded, but always close enough to a mother's lips to check their breath. A restless baby might be soothed with a slow rocking motion, even as the mother kept her eyes fixed on the dark entrance of the shelter, listening to every sound of the night. Grandparents often played a vital role in guarding sleeping infants. Too old to hunt but still sharp of ear, they volunteered to keep watch in the dim hours between midnight and dawn, tending the embers, shifting hides to keep out drafts, and murmuring softly to fretful babies so their mothers could steal a little sleep. These elders remembered winters past when a moment's neglect had cost the tribe dearly, and their voices carried both comfort and warning. Around them, the younger adults would sleep in half-wakefulness, ready to rouse at a whisper. Even the smallest children learned early to help guard their baby siblings, waking to the sound of a whimper and pressing close to keep them warm. The methods of protection went beyond human vigilance. The very tools of survival doubled as defense. Spears and stone axes were always kept near sleeping families, not hung far away, and the entrance to a cave might be partly blocked with rocks or thorny branches to slow any intruder. If the wind howled too fiercely, the opening would be sealed almost completely with hides, leaving only a narrow gap for smoke to escape, while the family huddled inside, breathing in the same warm air. In those long nights, the steady rhythm of breathing became a lullaby for infants, the sound of safety itself, a reminder that many bodies surrounded them, all alert to danger. Sometimes the tribe slept under open skies while traveling to new hunting grounds. On those nights, babies were guarded even more closely. They were swaddled so deeply in fur that only the tip of the nose peeked out, and their parents took turns holding them while others slept. The fire was kept alive with careful feeding, casting a circle of warmth and light that predators feared to cross. Hunters would sit just beyond that circle, listening to the darkness, their stone blades ready, while the mothers rocked and hummed with even in sleep. The adults on the ground around the infants shifted closer to block stray gusts of wind, forming a living wall that grew warmer as the hours passed. Danger also came from within the cold itself. A night wind slipping through a crack could do as much harm as a prowling wolf. Parents learned to trace the flow of air with their hands, feeling where it touched bare skin, and to build small nests of hides that trapped body heat. Babies often slept against a mother's breast under layers of fur, where her own warmth regulated their fragile temperature. But mothers did not do this alone. If she grew weary, another woman would take the child and hold it just as close, sharing the same instinct to guard it from both the cold and any sudden threat from the dark. In these moments, infants were not only children of their parents, but of the entire tribe. The act of guarding sleeping infants shaped human behavior in profound ways. It taught people to be light sleepers, to hear every creak of wind, every distant howl. It taught them to value cooperation over solitude, because a single family could not keep watch alone through endless winter nights, and it forged a bond between adults and children deeper than mere duty. The baby was not just a life to protect, but a promise of survival, the living future of the group. This knowledge lent every watchful night a quiet, sacred weight. There were nights when predators dared to come close, a flicker of movement at the cave mouth, a low growl carried on the wind, and every adult would rise in silence, spears in hand, positioning themselves between the sound and the cluster of sleeping mothers and babies. The infants, sensing the sudden tension, might whimper, but a quick pat or soft hum would keep them calm even as the adults stood ready to strike. These moments rarely turned violent. Often, a thrown torch or a shout would send the intruder fleeing, but they reminded everyone why the babies could never be left unguarded, why even in exhaustion, no one truly slept without one ear open. Through countless winters, these practices became second nature. No one had to explain to a young mother why she must keep her baby close, or to a father why he must sleep with a spear within reach. It was life, woven into every breath and heartbeat, and because they guarded their infants so fiercely, the tribe's children survived to grow strong, to learn the ways of fire and stone, to carry those same instincts into the next generation. The love that kept them awake through icy nights, the vigilance that built walls of bodies around the smallest sleepers, was the same love that would one day shape humanity itself. In the glow of firelight, as the cold wind prowled outside and unseen eyes watched from the dark, the infant slept peacefully, unaware of the danger, because an entire world of care stood between it and harm. The cold in those ancient winters was not something to be ignored, nor something to be briefly endured. It pressed itself into every stone, every hide, every bone, seeping into the marrow of anyone who dared sleep unguarded. In such a world, warmth was not just comfort, it was survival itself, and no life was more precious to guard than that of a newborn child. When the bitter wind blew and snow drifted high outside the caves, humans turned instinctively to one another, lying close in tightly knit clusters, using the shared heat of their bodies to create small islands of safety in a sea of ice. For the youngest among them, these islands of warmth were nothing less than life itself. At night, the family group became a living hearth. Mothers would curl around their infants, wrapping them in thick furs, while fathers pressed in behind, their heavy arms forming a second barrier against the cold. Older siblings, grandparents, and even cousins joined the circle, layering themselves like stones in a wall. This human nest held the baby in its softest center, where heat pooled and could not easily escape. It was not planned with words or instructions, yet every person in the group understood where they belonged. The instinct to keep the child warm and breathing was as deep as hunger, as powerful as fear of the dark. No one had to be told why they slept this way. They felt it in their bones, the same way a wolf pack curls around its pups in the snow. On the coldest nights when the air outside could kill exposed flesh in minutes, the tribe's fire burned low but steady, casting a soft red glow that reflected off the cave walls. The warmth of that fire helped, but the greater warmth came from the bodies pressed together. Children who had spent the day running and playing, now slept tucked against their mothers, their small frames adding yet more heat to the shared space. Even the old men, whose joints ached from years of hunting and hardship, bore the discomfort of sleeping on hard stone floors because they knew what was at stake. They lay shoulder to shoulder, breathing in the same warm air, their hearts beating in unison, with the tiny one sheltered in the middle. The shared heat of the tribe was more than physical. It carried an emotional weight, a feeling of security that allowed babies to drift into deeper, calmer sleep, surrounded by the slow rhythm of adult breathing, lulled by the faint heartbeat of a mother and the murmured whispers of kin. Infants did not wake as easily from hunger or fear. The closeness kept them calm and quiet, which in turn made the whole group safer. A silent child did not attract predators in the night. The tribe learned, without anyone having to explain it, that warmth and closeness not only preserved life, but also nurtured peace in the youngest minds. There were many ways to arrange such sleeping clusters. In the deepest caves, where cold winds could not easily enter, families might stretch out on beds of pine boughs covered with soft furs, all nestled in a single great pile. On the move, when they traveled through open country without shelter, they would huddle beneath a great hide tent, using stones and branches to anchor the edges against the wind. There, too, the infants were placed in the center, swaddled so deeply that only their tiny noses peeked out, warm breath fogging the air in little puffs. Hunters slept around them with spears in hand, while mothers shared the duty of waking to feed or rock the children if they stirred. In these close quarters, heat was a shared resource, as valuable as food or water, and no one begrudged the effort to keep it circulating. Even the tribe's dogs or wolf companions joined the pile, pressing their shaggy bodies against human backs. Their breath added another layer of heat, and their keen ears kept watch while people dozed. Babies often fell asleep listening to the quiet huff of a resting dog beside them, never knowing that these animals were guardians as well as bedfellows. In this mingling of species, warmth was not something separate for humans alone. It was a gift shared among all who sought shelter together, bound by the cold into one protective family. Elders often spoke of the way warmth passed from person to person, like water filling a hollow. If one member of the group was chilled, they would be moved closer to the center where the collective body heat was strongest. Infants, so small and vulnerable, never left that heart of the cluster. Even if a mother drifted into a deeper sleep, another woman, a sister or aunt, might reach over to adjust the baby's furs, to press her hand against the tiny chest and feel it rise and fall. This constant awareness of the child's presence and temperature ensured that no cold draft, no sudden drop in body heat, went unnoticed. The practice of group sleeping also made the tribe more unified. Children grew up knowing the shapes and scents of every adult, recognizing their voices in the dark, understanding instinctively that they were protected not by one pair of arms but by many. Babies who woke hungry in the night were quickly fed, sometimes not even by their own mother alone, because other nursing women in the tribe might share the duty. This communal care was as warming to the soul as the pile of furs was to the body. A child never lay shivering and alone. There was always a hand to hold, always a chest to rest against, always a heartbeat nearby. In those long winters, danger was never far away. Sometimes a predator's cry would echo in the distance, or the wind would shift and carry an unfamiliar scent into the cave. The entire group would stir as one, pulling the infants even closer, the circle tightening around them until every tiny body was completely hidden. The fire might be stoked to throw more light on the cave mouth, or banked lower to hide the tribe from sight, depending on what threat they faced. But never, not for an instant, was a baby left at the edge of the sleeping place, where the cold could creep in. The center of the group was sacred space, guarded by warmth, love and vigilance. There were moments of hardship too, when food was scarce and bodies thinner, when warmth was harder to maintain. On those nights the shared heat became more vital than ever. The tribe would lie so close that breath mingled in the darkness, each person surrendering a bit of their own comfort to shield the infants. Sometimes they woke chilled to the bone, their backs stiff from the hard ground, but the babies were warm, and that was all that mattered. The instinct to preserve the youngest outweighed every personal discomfort, because the survival of the child was the survival of the tribe itself. This way of sleeping shaped the rhythm of human life. It made people into creatures of closeness, creatures who trusted the presence of others through the night. It taught them to value not only individual strength, but the power of the group. the understanding that together they could create what no single person could, a living barrier against the cold and the dark. The warmth of the tribe was not just a physical thing, it was a bond, an unspoken agreement that every breath and heartbeat mattered, especially the smallest ones at the center of the nest. When the dawn came, and the fire was rekindled, the infants would wake drowsy and warm, their cheeks flushed with safety. The adults would stretch their limbs, shake out the furs and smile at the sight of the tiny ones yawning. Another night had passed without loss, another night in which the collective warmth of the group had defeated the winter. This nightly ritual, repeated countless times over generations, left its mark on human nature. It taught us to sleep best, not in solitude, but side by side, sharing the heat of our bodies, passing safety from one heartbeat to another. Through these practices, humanity endured the Ice Age. Babies, swaddled deep in the soft heart of the tribe, grew strong enough to see many more winters. They learned, long before they could speak, that to be human is to be surrounded by others, to draw warmth not only from fire and fur, but from love itself. And as they slept peacefully, protected by the living wall of family and kin, the cold winds prowled outside in vain, unable to touch the fragile lives shielded by so many beating hearts. In the bitter cold of the Ice Age, when survival was measured not by the hour but by each shallow breath drawn against the wind, the fate of every tribe rested quietly in the soft arms of its infants. No one put it into words then, but the people knew it with a certainty deeper than language. If the babies lived, the tribe would live. If they slept peacefully through the night, their small hearts beating steadily, then the long days of hunger and hunting were not in vain. Around every fire, in every cave or wind-sheltered hollow, the first humans learned lessons about care and closeness that would ripple forward through thousands of generations. The simple act of keeping a baby warm and calm was no minor thing. Infants who cried less did not waste precious energy in the bitter cold. Their tiny bodies, so fragile in a world of ice and predators, could devote every drop of strength to growing instead of burning it up in distress. Parents came to understand, without needing to reason it through, that a baby who slept soundly beside its mother, wrapped in layers of fur and cradled by the heat of the whole tribe, was a baby who would thrive. These infants were more likely to survive the long winter nights, more likely to reach childhood, and eventually more likely to become hunters, gatherers, firekeepers, and parents themselves. The tribe's very future lay in the stillness of their sleeping form. Close contact through the night did more than simply protect children from frostbite and exhaustion. The steady heartbeat of a mother, the rhythmic breathing of siblings and elders, pressed close, created an environment where infants learned calm from the very beginning. In modern times, we know that such closeness regulates a newborn's temperature, stabilizes its breathing, and reduces deadly risks. But long before science could name these effects, early humans lived them. They felt the difference between a fretful, shivering baby and a warm, contented one, and they adjusted their lives around that knowledge. A calm infant not only survived, but also allowed parents to rest more deeply, which in turn made them better hunters, more vigilant guards, and more patient caregivers. In this way, the benefits of restful sleep passed outward from the cradle to the whole tribe. The habits of sleeping together, of offing infants nestled at the center of the human circle, also shaped emotional bonds. Babies who spent every night hearing the low murmurs of many familiar voices grew up with an unshakable sense of belonging. They knew the scent of every adult in the group, recognized their touch, trusted their presence. These bonds made cooperation easier when the children grew older. A tribe bound by such closeness was more likely to share food freely, to defend one another, and to raise not just individual offspring but a whole generation of resilient young. The babies who had been lulled by the heartbeat of the tribe would one day hunt side by side, confident in the strength of the group that had nurtured them. Even hunger and hardship taught this lesson. When food was scarce and bodies thinner, when the cold crept deeper into bone and breath, parents tightened the circle around their children rather than loosening it. They sacrificed their own warmth to preserve the warmth of the smaller. That instinct, to protect the helpless no matter the cost, made human survival possible. The infants who were sheltered so fiercely became the adults who sheltered others. In this way, the care of babies set in motion a chain of loyalty, compassion, and cooperation that defined what it meant to be human. Predators too played their part in reinforcing these practices. A crying infant could draw unwanted attention, so the tribe learned how to soothe babies quickly with gentle rocking, soft humming, and the reassuring pulse of skin-to-skin contact. Calm babies were safer babies, and safer babies meant safer camps. Over time, groups that excelled at keeping infants quiet and warm were less likely to be attacked, less likely to lose their youngest members to exposure or fear. These tribes grew larger and stronger, and their children carried forward both the physical health and the cultural habits of communal care. The wisdom of sleeping close, of wrapping the youngest in shared warmth and unbroken attention, became a survival strategy as vital as building tools or lighting fires. It was not just physical heat that mattered, but emotional warmth as well. Infants bathed in the comfort of familiar arms learned early that the world could be trusted. This sense of safety shaped their developing mind. Children who woke to kind faces, who were fed before their cries turned desperate, grew into adults with steadier tempers and quicker bonds of friendship. In an age when conflict with rival groups could be deadly, tribes made up of emotionally stable, cooperative members had the advantage. The very rhythms of sleep, breath, and heartbeat in infancy became the foundations of human society. Those long winter nights also forged memory and tradition. Around the fire, as mothers nursed babies and fathers tended embers, elders told stories of ancestors who had survived even harsher cold, of mothers who had shielded their newborns beneath layers of hides, of families who had shared their last scraps of meat with the youngest, rather than eat alone. These stories reinforced the tribe's deepest truth. Caring for infants was not just a duty of love, but a duty of survival. Calm, well-rested babies were not a luxury. They were the promise of future strength. With each generation, these practices grew more refined. Families learned which furs trapped the most heat, how to arrange sleeping clusters to keep drafts away, how to build windbreaks from stone or ice. They discovered that infants slept best when held close, hearing the slow, steady rhythms of the human body, rather than lying apart. Even without words to describe it, they were passing down knowledge about infant care that would echo through time. These were the first lessons in what we now call attachment, thermal regulation, and communal protection. Lessons written not in books but in the very survival of humankind. Imagine a single night, the fire glowing low, the wind howling beyond the cave mouth. A newborn lies swaddled in soft fur against its mother's chest. Around them, brothers, sisters, cousins, grandparents, and even the hunting dogs curl together in a living wall of heat. The baby stirs once, hears a low hum, feels the warmth of so many bodies, and drifts back to sleep. The mother closes her eyes too, knowing she is not alone in guarding her child. When dawn comes, the whole group rises stronger for having rested. Multiply this scene by thousands upon thousands of nights, by countless generations, and it becomes clear how these quiet practices shaped our species. The result was more than survival, it was adaptation. Tribes who mastered the art of calming and warming their infants could raise more children to adulthood. More children meant more hunters, more gatherers, more defenders of the camp, more builders of shelter. Human populations slowly grew despite the harshness of the Ice Age. The circle around the baby was also a circle around the future, and those who honored it endured where others faded away. In time, these patterns became ingrained in human behavior. Even today, people instinctively soothe babies by holding them close, rocking them in rhythm, humming softly, as if by some ancient memory. These are echoes of nights long past, when the survival of the entire tribe depended on the stillness of its smallest member. Calm, well-rested babies did not just make life easier for their parents, they made humanity itself possible. By keeping infants warm, safe, and peaceful, early humans secured a lineage of stronger, more cooperative people who would go on to explore every corner of the earth. The soft breath of a sleeping baby was more than a moment of peace. It was a signal, a sign that the tribe's efforts were working, that the cold had been held at bay for another night, that hope still lived in the cradle of their arms. Those who cherished that breath, who guarded it through every dark hour, planted the seeds of human endurance. In the hush of a winter cave, as the firelight flickered and the heartbeat of the tribe surrounded its smallest members, humanity learned its most enduring lesson. To survive, we must care for one another, beginning with the child who sleeps at the center of the circle.